Welcome all to the latest RP discussion topic. Today we're going to be looking at how to RP a nation's leader, and that's going to involve what constitutes a national leader, how is a leader character different to normal characters and how to approach that, how to deal with the character making leadership decisions, types of national leaders for different types of nations, how different political environments in a nation shape the character of a leader, good character arcs for national leaders and how to approach such, what not to do with your national leader, and some good examples of national leaders both in real life and Ancerious. So the first thing is what constitutes a national leader? Well, anyone in a position of power on a national level who can essentially make decisions either on behalf of a nation or is it the head position where they are, I guess, what you would call the sort of like head individual, even if there's a senate or whatever behind them. At the end of the day, they are the main face, main leader of your nation. There can be multiple, but there will sort of be at least one character or several that will take up the position of this, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So, how is a leader different to just running normal characters in an RP? Well, the position of power over a nation is pretty privileged. This comes with a whole host of different things, the most being power. Your leader is now, able to command what is essentially an entire spacefaring nation or a planetary going nation, and they have unbridled power at their fingertips. Now, it's true that they might have a constitution or governing rules or a governing body that can, oversee them to make sure that they don't go absolutely crazy bonkers, but power corrupts. And, if you are going to be running these national leaders with all of this power, you should start thinking about things like, do they abuse it? How do they use their power? Are they an active person? Are they sort of sit on the sidelines, so they only have one sort of focus, etc.? With great power as well comes burdens. I mean, you're making decisions on behalf of, at least in the Ancerious setting, billions or trillions of people. And one wrong move can, be signing away the lives of God knows how many. So, how do they handle this on a national leader scale? Do they distance themselves from it and sort of take it from a cold and calculating perspective where, it's all just a numbers game to them and they're just doing what they need? Or do they, take an active role and, effectively take things as at a personal level? Like, do they actually try and get involved, and do they try and berate themselves every night? With this burden of power, you also need to think about, which is different from normal, well, sort of different from normal characters, how do they deal with the mental strain? How do they deal with the constant weight on their shoulders? It's all well and good if you have a character in a normal roleplay setting, which has a big backstory and everything is sort of like, they've got something that's riding on their shoulders and, it's a burden that they need to bear. Well, now imagine a nation leader that, again, as said, everything that they do has millions of lives on the line. They have to do things for the benefit of their own nation. Otherwise, bad shit's going to happen. So, one wrong move means disaster. So, how does this weigh on them? And how do they approach said decisions and weigh it up, not just from a moral standpoint, but their own ideals? Are they an idealist? How do they approach taking decisions that are completely against their, morals or ideals just because they have to do it, just because context has put them in that situation? So that's completely different from typical characters. just because of how much power and weight is behind each of their decisions. And that needs to be reflected, especially in their grappling of personal issues on top of all of the nation issues, with the whole morals versus practicality thing. It's even more interesting, in my opinion, when you have a authoritarian dictator, say, in comparison to a prime minister of an elected government, because that prime minister of an elected government, okay, yeah, he's going to be very concerned about vote shares and whether people are going to like him or not. But if stuff is happening that's pretty crazy, he can always turn to his party and say, like, in back doors and say, look, this is happening, this is pretty hard, whatever, we need to do something about it, blah, 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 blah. But if you're an authoritarian dictator, you have to look strong all the time. Otherwise, opposition elements within your own government, be that military leaders or, house leaders for noble houses, if they sense weakness, they're gonna go for you. So, is your leader able to be open with other characters, or can they confide in only themselves? And how does that get represented? So it all kind of depends on the different types and how that's going to be different. So the next sort of topic is how to deal with leadership decisions from like an in-character and out-of-character standpoint. Well, obviously the TLDR is it depends on the leader, depends on the character. How a dictator may approach a situation of war may be completely different to how a prime minister whose nation doesn't exactly want to get involved in the war approaches a situation. So always bear in mind that context of a leader is pretty main. So the first thing that you should really sort of focus on, at least, is a balance in character between the person's sort of passion and ideals and the practicality of a scenario. So how can, in character, as you writing as this person, how do these two sides weigh up? Do they need to take this example of, declaring war on this nation because it's practical, and if they don't, they might suffer indescribable amounts of damage on their nation, when the fact that they're actually pacifist, or their entire party is built on the whole premise of, avoiding war? How do they take that into account? So you have to sort of put that on the table and go, right, how would they reconcile this? Would they seek advice in other characters? Would they sort of have an internal monologue, etc., like grappling with themselves? It's up to you, but that is sort of always balance practicality with personal passion and ideals when making any sort of massive leadership decision. Again, in different nations with different cultures and different sort of approaches to government, it could be a bit different in that obviously your elected individual is not going to have, ultimate executive power to be able to be like, oh, well, I make this decision on a whim. It's going to be voted on in, whatever democratic assembly that you might have or group of individuals that you might have. But at the end of the day, it's going to be kind of written from your character making that decision in the end. And they must try to overcome any opposition to that decision. Even if they do decide that it is worth going to war over this particular, contextual scenario, and they've wrestled with their internal sort of pacifism or whatever, well, now they've got to actually convince all of the other people who support them that what they're deciding is best for the nation. And they've got to do that through, whatever means necessary, be that impassioned speeches, cold, hard facts and logic, or assassinating, or bribing, or bullying as many underlings as they need to get the job done. So they have to overcome any opposition. And, in a democratic society, that might be, through bribery or whatever, because you've got to try and maybe convince that Senate or group of individuals from voting against you and taking that decision forward to actually implement it. So, you must always think in character, is the choice that you're making sort of the best one with the weight on their shoulders? Do they want to live with the choices as well? I mean, can your nation leader that is so focused around pacifism actually, that they could go through with and make the decision after wrestling with themselves, but can they live with it? How are they gonna make that decision and then live with themselves? They might actually decide, what, maybe we do need to go to war after all of this, but I can't be the one to do it. So, will they put the weight of whatever they do for the rest of their lives before the nation, or vice versa? So, the whole sort of key bit that I've sort of gone over for the last few points is always, when writing, national leaders, focus on internal conflict with your character. And it's kind of like this with any other character writing. Always focus on your internal conflict, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to be most interesting. Focusing on your character grappling with their morals and idealism when facing these proper situations is how you make them human. It's how people relate to them. It's how somebody might go, oh shit, yeah, I'm reading so-and-so's, Prime Minister at the moment, and they have to make a decision on whether they've got to, send supplies to a front line, which if they don't, it's going to collapse, and loads of people are going to die, and the war's going to be completely and utterly sort of fucked on that front. But if they do send the supplies to that front line, then these two other systems are going to be woefully undefended, in which case a load of civilians are also going to die, but the war's going to be able to, save more. That person struggling to make that choice is going to make you relate to them, because you're now in a situation where you're like, oh, well, I've faced, situations in my life where I didn't want to make X decision because it goes against everything that I needed to, but I had to out of practicality. These are the things that people enjoy. People enjoy internal conflict, especially regarding major decisions. It makes them more human, it fleshes them out, and it shows people their reasoning and their thought process. And at the end of the day, if you can understand a character's thought process behind their decisions and why they do things, it makes them more human, and it makes them more relatable, and you like them more because you can understand them. And if you can understand them, they're a good character. So that is your sort of, I guess, number one thing of how to sort of deal with leadership decisions, is always show the internal character and their monologue and their problems. And always, if you can, if you've written this character for a long time and they've gone through many decisions and there's been many things leading up into this point, always include context to other situations that may be affecting them in their position, or link it to other stories and events that you have had in the past that may have some sort of bearing, even if it's offhand comments. Because if somebody's been reading your stuff for a while and you drop literally in a single sentence a couple of lines or a couple of words hinting at an event that happened, I don't know, a year ago, but was kind of a big thing, and that character was involved in it, anyone who likes reading your character can be like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense, and it helps tie it in. Tying in extra context and links to other stories, again, makes it feel realistic, it makes it feel human, because things are having a knock-on effect. It also helps validate RP, and it helps validate their story as a cohesive, narrative direction, rather than just random events that happen as and when you need them to. So, those are very important. And, at the end of the day, if you're really thinking to yourself like, Jesus, I don't actually know how to write this, just approach it from a realistic perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if you had to make this decision? How would you feel if you were in that spot, facing all of this horrible stuff, and you have to make a choice? And then take how you feel, translate it into your character, and then make changes as needed to be more, I guess, in character with that individual, rather than just, just carbon copying yourself. So that's sort of how to deal with leadership decisions from an in-character and out-of-character perspective. Obviously we'll go over what not to do later, but I don't need to say that don't approach it from, I guess, a metagamey or out of character perspective, and that, like, oh, my nation's going to make this decision because it just so happens to be the best thing to do in RP at the time, even though they don't know that, and even though it's kind of out of character for them. Keep choices and decisions as much in character as you can. Don't let anything out of character for them, in character or out of character, affect it, if that makes sense. So don't just have them make choices that they wouldn't normally take. And, there's nothing worse than building up a character to have a specific, I guess, personality, and then suddenly them choosing something completely different, like a authoritarian warlike character suddenly deciding for peace out of nowhere with no development. So those are things to focus on. 1 second. That's better. So next up are types of national leaders. So I'm obviously not going to go over like each and every name of a leader type out there. So we'll just go over general things. So democratically elected leaders. So these are your prime ministers, your presidents, etc. I mean, at the end of the day, they will function pretty much like they do in real life. They get elected on a platform of promises. Your leader should, in their decision making, try to further those promises. Because remember, the goal of a democratically elected leader is to be re-elected. So they need to be re-elected by the public, positive opinion. And to do that, they need to complete their promises. So if you bring in a democratically elected leader, you need that leader to try and, actually complete his goals, complete his promises. And that needs to be reflected in the decisions. He's also going to be kind of limited in what he can do, because there's going to be some sort of constitution limiting what he can do, but also there's going to be opposition parties that are going to openly slander and criticise his decisions and his work, and there's going to be elements in his own party that are going to do so, and he's also going to have to try and pass through whatever decisions he makes through, the Senate or, Parliament or whatever, to try and pass them. So he can't just snap his fingers and decide to go to war. He has to try and convince people. So in a democratically sort of elected sphere for nations, you have to focus on the fact that he's not an all-powerful character. He is going to be quite focused on trying to keep his house in order, I guess the term is to say. Trying to keep the public on side, trying to keep his party on side, and trying to smooth things over with the opposition so that, everything can go okay. Obviously, one thing to note with democratically elected leaders is that there is only going to be so long that you get to play with them. And just in case you're like, what do you mean? Well, obviously, depending on how your leaders are elected and how often you have elections, you might have the situation, which is kind of unlike authoritarians or whatnot, where you have a leader that you really like playing, and then it comes to a point in character where logically there would be elections. Now, okay, you can just go, oh well, him and the party won the elections, but this is kind of going into government as well, but you also kind of need that to be, again, in character and understood. Like, there's no reason for your Prime Minister who got elected on a platform of anti-war to be re-elected if he got your nation into like 2 wars. You know, like that doesn't make sense. He wouldn't be re-elected. You might love the character and you might want to keep the character for your nation, but you have to put a sense of realism and practicality first. However, there are ways to tie in this for your benefit, which is where you can make a new nation leader, or in the case that I always have tried to say in previous discussions with, you know, governments, if you create lots of opposition parties, you can create their leaders, and then you can have a whole selection of, you know, cool characters that can step up to the spotlight of national leader. And if, you know, one of them gets ousted because they've failed to, you know, implement their promises or whatnot, or they just did a shit job, or, you know, something happened, you've got another one ready to step up to the mark, and your previous nation leader, who you really enjoyed playing, suddenly steps down and becomes, I don't know, the head of the opposition. So they can still very much be in the limelight and focused on, but they're not the ones at the head of control anymore. So that's how I would say going about doing sort of democratically elected leaders in the type. Now, the next one is obviously going to be authoritarian dictators. Now, there's a whole swathe of like types for this one, but I guess the sort of authoritarian dictator in this regard is going to be something akin to a military junta leader or someone to that effect. They're in power purely because, well, they're powerful, and so is the structure underneath them. So, at the end of the day, the person at the controls is going to be one of 2 sort of types. Either they're going to have absolute power, in which case, suddenly, your national leader can do whatever the hell he likes, whenever the hell he likes. Now, that comes with strengths and weaknesses, obviously. He has absolute power to do whatever he wants. So, if you decide, well, it's actually in character for my nation or my nation leader to do X, they can just do so, because, you know, he has the power to do that. However, just like with a democratically elected leader, your own absolute dictator needs to convince, or at least get on side, most of his, I guess, established infrastructure of cronies, so that, well, people basically don't try to undermine him. Because there's always going to be opposition, and your authoritarian dictator is going to have to face that. He's going to have to deal with internal corruption. He's going to have to deal with internal opposition groups that, while part of his own, I guess, cohorts, are out to try and oust him and replace someone else in his place. You know, you've got this whole plethora of powerful individuals that are going to be under this, you know, almighty dictator that he has to placate in some way, or at least force into fear to do things that he wants. And if he ruins everything, well, it doesn't matter how solid his hold on his nation is. If it gets bad enough, people are just going to oust him because, you know, it's all his fault. So, yes, while your character will have absolute power, their absolute power can be their downfall, and it can destroy their own power really, really quickly should they take decisions to do so. So, obviously, your dictator needs to tread a very tight rope of, you know, either side. And it needs to make sense for them in character as well. You know, how did they become dictator? How do they deal with being dictator? They can't just, you know, cackle maniacally to themselves every day and be like, oh yes, you know, I'm amazing, I have all this power, I can do whatever the hell I want. Obviously they can do that, but, you know, unless they're actually doing something worthwhile, they're not going to last long. So, you know, they need to have a reason for why they came to power. They need to have reasons for, you know, why do people support them, for a character focus, you know, be that your dictator character is, he's a really good impassioned orator, you know, he can really stir up the crowd, he can get everyone on side, he's got a silver tongue, so he knows exactly what to say. Or it might be that they're an absolute genius, so other people might do the speaking, but he is a strategic and, you know, operational genius. He can pretty much plan out whatever the hell he wants, and he's really good at science or whatever. But You know, these are things that you need to sort of decide of why he's in power. You can have a completely inept national leader if you want, in the form of a dictator or anyone really, but we'll get into that in a bit. But it all comes down to sort of like your leader for a dictatorship is going to quite heavily define the nation and the nation's outlook, but also the nation's society and culture are going to define the dictator. So you really need to intertwine those two, properly with the context and I guess the character backstory and how to, bring that up properly. I guess the next form of sort of authoritarian dictator things is your good old aristocratic or hereditary emperor, or dynasty or kingdom or whatnot. So again, this is not much different in fact that you're going to have to placate all of your, I guess, noble houses or internal politics, and try to get them on side. Otherwise, they're going to try and oust your family line. It depends on whether your monarch or dictator shares power with either another monarch or dictator, or they have a constitutional parliament or some other body that focuses on regulating and running the nation. So you could think about how is your monarch or your dictator's relationship with this other powerful body. Does this body think that your nation leader is incompetent, or he's too warlike? Or does your nation leader think that your sub-governing body, your Senate or whatever, is spineless? Or, they're not doing something right, or they're too corrupt? So you can have interesting interplay there where your character is constantly, paranoid or, suspicious of other aspects. And obviously with the whole aristocratic emperor and royal houses, you've got lots of character interplay going on in that regard. And they're probably going to have been brought up in a very different life and context to many other characters. They might be sheltered as absolute fuck. So you might have a really naive monarch who just has no idea of how the world works. And you can play that out really nicely in character. And approach that from a sort of, they're just stepping onto the stage and they're trying to work everything out. And they're then going to have to, roll with the punches on a national level and develop as a person. So, yeah, there's kind of like lots of different ways to approach authoritarianism and that way. But the next one is sort of like, I guess, hive minds or advanced AI. So these are a little bit different because to approach these from how to write them, for a hive mind, I guess it depends on what type of hive mind. At the end of the day, it comes down for hive minds that you have two ways of going. You either have a hive mind that you write as an entity, in which case your national leader isn't so much a character, it's an entity. And that entity in itself can be a character, but it's woefully different to what you might see. It's not going to be walking around talking to people. It's not going to be interacting. It's not going to be in the room talking to other national leaders or conducting diplomacy or talking to a senate or, doing any of these things. It's going to be working in the background in the minds of all of these hive mind individuals, controlling them and giving direction to the nation as a whole. Now, to write that, in my opinion, you'll need to do it as overview thoughts. So, how is this hive mind character, or entity rather, manipulating and acting behind the scenes? What does it feel? What does it think? It's a non-linear mind, so it's going to be treating every other component in the entirety of its reach as a limb. So think about how you control your arms or any of your limbs on your body And that's kind of how that hive mind, that entity, is going to control, like, a diplomat, or a ship, or approach a war, or approach a resource situation. It's going to see it as like, oh, well, I'll just dedicate some of my toes to go and, like, doing something, you know, like, it can either be subconscious, and you just need to write from kind of, I guess, quite alien or weird perspective in that, and that you want to have it as an overview of the hive mind looking down onto everything else, rather than it just, you know, being there like, hi, my name's Bob, blah, 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 blah. So that's my take on, I guess, hive mind overview, where everything is just one amalgam of this greater being. The second is going to be, you know, a hive mind where you've got lots of different individuals, but they're all connected up to the greater whole. You can still have, you know, a national leader conventionally in that setting. The difference is that obviously they're going to be connected to all of their individual people. And that might mean that everything's a direct democracy. You know, that national leader might have been chosen from this, you know, specific hive mind because they're the best for the job. Or it's just a democratic vote and they just happen to win. You know, all done through mental actions. Well, then you need to write this. That's going to be your character's backstory, you know. How are they going to be able to respond and think if they're attached to all of these other beings in this hive mind when making decisions? Are they just going to consult all of the rest of the beings? Are they going to, you know, look to all of the rest of the hive mind to try and assist them in, you know, making decisions or bearing the weight of, you know, all of this stuff going on? There's lots of interesting ways that you can write that, and I think that that really comes down to the context of the hive mind or faction in general. So it's not just, you know, blag, I like to eat people. There's always going to be some sort of entity or character behind a hive mind, or an AI for that matter, that is going to still be built off the context and the general environments of that nation, so that it's not just a blank slate. There's always going to be character there. There's always going to be elements that you can use to write to help make, you know, your nation leader or nation representative or nation entity an interesting read. So I guess next up we have how different political environments shape the character of a leader. So this is kind of like an important one. So we've already kind of touched on this, where, you know, for example, authoritarians have more power to the leader, but they also have to watch their step closer. You know, they don't have to worry about votes, but need to worry about keeping control, being paranoid because other leaders might have been ousted in the past. Your character might even have done a coup attempt to remove the last dictator, so he needs to watch it from happening himself. You know, maybe they're detached from things, or they have a particular hunger for more power. You know, it depends on the context, depending on how competitive the society and the culture is, how absolutely, you know, overwhelming the control of information or the general population is, you know, whatnot. Democratic environments are obviously going to shape an individual who's going to be more focused on public approval and re-election, but he's also going to be able to delegate a lot more of his decisions to underlings, so that he doesn't have so much weight on his shoulders. But he does have to, you know, worry about winning through votes and through opinion, and keeping not only his own party placated, but his opposition on the back foot, so they don't get footholds in his, I guess, voting areas or whatnot. So at the end of the day, there's no, like, set way that I can show you how these political environments shape the character of a leader, you know, from an overall perspective, but I can give you examples from real life historical situations. You know, you've got individuals who were thrust into power and then were defined, you know, in their character as individual leaders by the circumstances of their rule. So Winston Churchill. Has been thrust into a podium of, he's a war hero. He did all this stuff. He helped Britain, get through the war. He was, dogged. He was stubborn. He never backed down. He did all this good stuff. He was amazing. Blah 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 blah. He stepped up to the challenge. Well, that's true. He did do a lot of those things when he was thrust into the limelight. But he also dealt with raging alcohol issues, and he also repressed his own people, and he also did some serious fucked up shit to India, and he also did a load of other things where, decision-wise, a lot of people didn't like him for it, and a lot of people still don't like him for it. So, you've got these situations where your leader will be defined as you go on in roleplay. You've got other people. I mean, look at fucking Hitler, for Christ's sake, or whatnot. You've got an individual who came to power promising change and, rapid increase in living standards and, solving the economy. And, well, he went down in flames trying to commit mass genocide and having started all of these wars. So it is kind of a case of, when creating a character for a leader, take your nation's political environment and help use it to create your leader character. How are they going to act? How did they come to be where they are? What's their goals? What's their, I guess, general outlook on not just internal affairs, but external affairs, and just create a baseline for, here's your character, this is what they believe, this is how they approach situations, this is their backstory. Be sure to include several interesting plot points there as starter threads that you can follow later down the line. We'll get to that in a sec. And just have this nice foundation ready to go for your nation. Even if you haven't actually gone into this, it's never too late to do so. You can always flesh out your national leader and go, right, there's the foundation. Now is the time to just develop it in RP. Loads of different characters in Ancerious have started out as this, I guess, ideal of what a player wants them to be, and has moved in a completely different direction because, well, roleplay has happened. One moment their leader was this absolutely awesome person who everyone loved, and the next minute they made a decision in a particular RP and it alienated all of their allies and cost a load of people their lives. Well, that's cool. That's development. Now that character has to live with that for the rest of their lives and has to deal with the political and, social ramifications and fallout of that in their nation. Roleplay that. That's good. That's excellent development. That's not a bad thing. If your leader fucks up, that is not a bad thing. But the key thing is to just take the environment and use it to shape the character for a foundation, and then to keep shaping the character as things change throughout roleplay. Your nation is going to change throughout roleplay, whether that be in Ancerious or elsewhere. Your leader is going to change too to accommodate that, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid. And that kind of leads on to our next point, which is character arcs. What ones are good for national leaders? What would I do? Well, as I kind of already said now, anything facing ongoing major adversity, an internal rise of opposition in your nation, continued crisis within the nation or out of it, and how they're maybe dealing with ongoing major wars on a personal level. It's all well and good that your nation might have an ongoing corruption problem or be on the verge of an uprising or, in a major war. That's cool. Your nation is responding to that, and your nation leader might have made statements and such responding to various things going on in character. But how's it affecting them personally? How is that being reflected in their character? So, for example, with the Union at the moment, for me, I'm running, my nation leader is Tani Aston. He's the Union Prime Minister, and he got elected on the premise of no war and focusing on rebuilding the Union economy. Well, guess what? He's now at the forefront of a nation that is pretty much embroiled, without a doubt, in the Third Ancerious War. And everything's gone to shit. And the quality of life is disappearing because of all of the galactic economic problems. Yeah, he's not dealing with that very well as an individual, because he's had to completely abandon all of his campaign promises. He knows he's not being re-elected. He knows there's internal division within the Union, and he knows that the public are against him because everyone has supported division and intervention. He is slowly falling apart, and it's sort of coming up to the elections, and he's on the verge of breakdown because everything has gone to shit. Represent that in your character, and I promise you, you cannot go wrong on that regard. Make them human. On top of this, arcs focused around sort of personal matters, such as maybe your nation leader is ill. Maybe they've got a long-term health problem. Maybe they have a romance. Perhaps that's with their, I guess, significant other, or maybe they're even having an affair. Maybe there's a little thing going on there that is causing problems for them. Explore it. Explore their love life and their friendships, and make them seem human. Just because you're in a position of that much power doesn't mean that you're just on your own all the time. Many nation leaders have significant others, or have been caught in affair scandals, or corruption with friends or whatnot. So try to go into stuff like that. A major loss is another one. Maybe they did lose a loved one, or maybe they lost a good friend. Possibly even to one of their crises, that they made a decision and it was the wrong decision and something happened. Maybe it was by their direct hand, but in sacrificing their good friend, they saved the nation or whatnot, So all of these things just help add humanity to a character and, help make them real to everyone. I had, for Empress Inara of Capital, a whole thing around her sort of love life, her romance. She was a gay character in a nation that put gays to death. So how did she approach that? Well, she had to reform everything, and she had to put a lot of people on stakes to do so. She lost her lover, as an example, but her lover was later resurrected by forces that she didn't quite understand, and that she had to grapple with the whole of that. She adopted a young child, and that changed her from this we'll take the galaxy down no matter what, to I've got a legacy now, maybe I made the wrong decision, maybe peace is the good option, and it kind of helped mellow her out. These are the developments that you want to be thinking of for your national leader. Obviously, you don't have to plan these over a long period of time. Just go with the flow. Go with what you enjoy and what feels right and is a natural progression for your leader. And part of that may even be having them lose power. Maybe your democratically elected leader gets voted out. Maybe your dictator gets couped. Maybe they lose their power. Maybe they're no longer the head of that nation. That's cool. That happens. That's just a natural part of nation politicking, There's nothing to say that your character, your leader character, is a bad character and that people will just stop reading if they stop being the leader of that nation. In fact, they're probably going to still read because they want to know what's actually happening to that character, and they want to see them still pop up because they're well written. Well, okay, maybe try and then have them try to regain that power by, counter-coupping or counter-revolutioning the new dictator, or, trying to get re-elected in the next elections or whatnot. It's much more fun to have characters take major pitfalls and they have to then operate without the power that they had and without the position that they had to try and regain it again. John Triarch is a major one, where he was the CEO of, Triarch Industries, and then Triarch Industries fell apart, and then he kind of refounded a company, Triarch Incorporated, but it was an absolute shadow of its former self. And while he was still, inverted commas, technically the nation leader and the CEO, he didn't really have anywhere near the power that he had before, and he was desperately trying to get back up to where he was beforehand. Um, just, you know, losing power and then regaining power is always a good storyline, and it's always a fun one to do when writing national leaders from a character perspective. Um, Anything where, as I sort of touched on before, serious mistakes that haunt them, personally, uh, always a good thing to add. They're always a fun one, especially when you get to slowly flesh out what actually happened over a long time. But the effects of what happened still clearly are affecting them to this day. And I guess a really good way to put these character arcs forward as well, and to help other players do the same, is have story arcs where nation leaders talk and interact with other nation leaders. A good way to flesh out both sides, to be honest. Both leaders then become friends. They could talk more openly with each other. They could divulge personal, I guess, beliefs or secrets. That then can have ramifications where, one nation leader might say, oh, well, actually, I believe in this, even though it's contrary to my regime or my nation. And the other nation leader might be like, oh fuck, well, that might have ramifications to our relationship in the future. That might have ramifications to our nations in general and diplomacy, and be a hint towards future events. I find that the best way to do this, because I know that people might take this as I'll do sort of like nation leaders meeting each other and doing diplomacy. Well, no. I find the best way to do leaders meeting other leaders to have good friendships informally. I find it best, instead of focusing on, I don't know, the signing of a treaty or the announcing of something, to start an RP or a writing piece after. Yeah? Like that night or something. When the character's tired, they're just chilling out with the other person or whatnot, and they're alone and they can speak their mind. Me, Crag, and Neo did a lot of that during the Second Ancerious War, where Empress Inara would confide in, the USM separatists or the Carnathian sort of diplomatic elements. And they would sort of be like, oh, Jesus, okay, like, that's pretty crazy, but this is our thoughts as well. And it helped both sides become more human. And it was like, well, actually, maybe Inara isn't the huge genocidal monster that all of our own forces are telling us. And at the same time, Inara was like, well, maybe the AGA aren't wanting to just completely steamroll the galaxy under their control or whatnot. And it helps make everyone seem more human and much more relatable. So, yeah, focus on nation leader meetings in a much more informal sense when stuff isn't planned or is planned, but it hasn't been controlled by the state, I would say. Another recent example of this that I can bring up is the meeting between Sapphire of the Union of Worlds and Tetlason of the ASN. And they met completely sort of randomly at a big diplomatic meeting away from everyone. They'd escaped their entourages and they just got talking. And it was just talking about, like, the sort of stuff that you'd expect, like personal beliefs, threats to the galaxy, ideology, like these sorts of things that really sort of got deep into the characters and how they would interact with each other. And it was absolutely awesome. And I'd really like to see more of that in the galaxy, because I think it would massively help flesh out all of the different factions and also the different faction leaders, and give an extra sort of, I guess, plane of story writing to the coming Third Ancerious War arc. So I guess the next bit is what not to do for your national leader. Well, obviously making them some sort of moustache twirly bad guy who just wants to do evil things for the sake of being evil. No, just don't do that. It's not how that happens. if your character or national leader is just a psychotic, crazy person who wants to declare war every day and like genocide people on a whim, yeah, they're not staying in power for more than like several days. If they even somehow got to power in the first place without being completely wrecked by internal opposition. Um, the same as just making this like democratic leader with, or even an authoritarian leader, just any leader with, shining with a shining resume of how amazing they are, and everyone loves them because they're so perfect, and they have no downsides because they're just the best individual ever, and they can do no wrong, and they're just this shining exemplar. It's that nobody cares. Like, if your super grand emperor has ruled for 20 million years, which is completely unrealistic, and I've seen that sort of thing where it's like, oh, my emperor's ruled for all this time. Well, no. Look at regime changes in real life, even in dictatorships, and see how quickly that stuff changes. Especially when there's major, again, contextual events of politics and international relations, like wars and such, can destabilise governments and political leaders instantly, and next thing you know, everything's changing. So don't have your nation leader be super, super old and super, super epic and everyone loves them. Don't have them have virtually no flaws. Always try to have your leaders, with lots of flaws, even if it is an AI or hive mind. Maybe have it be arrogant, maybe have it so that it doesn't understand specific things. Just give it hurdles give your character hurdles that they have to overcome. So, do not have a character without flaws or hurdles, because it just completely wipes out any storytelling potential that they have. Do not make it so that everyone loves them to the point where there's no opposition. If you have a democratically elected leader and, everyone loves them, cool, but their opposition won't. So, don't just write it so that every single decision that they make goes through Senate or Parliament or whatever and is just, hailed as a revolution for the people. Because that's not what happens in real life. Opposition parties will just vote against them because, well, it's voting against the government, and that's what the opposition parties do. So, try and make things realistic. Try and give them plenty of, I guess, pushback within their own society and their own nation, because that's what would realistically happen properly. If you're going to make, I guess, a super powerful leader, where they've got like superpowers or they're an entity or a deity, you need to have a reasonable, and this was kind of touched on in the entities, deities, and that discussion. You need to have a valid reason for why that individual doesn't just use their power constantly to just overcome all of these obstacles in this nation. Or if there is, or if they are doing that, a way for them to realise that they can't do enough because the nation still has issues. How does the character deal with this, not intervening or directly intervening? Don't have this all-powerful individual that just kind of, I guess, hand waves everything, both their own adversity and the nation's, because it's just really poor story writing. Don't have your leader be, I want to say, cardboard. There's a lot of, I guess, I would almost call it cookie cutter cardboard, where they just sort of go like, okay, I have a democratic president. He's a nice guy. He votes like for the good guy party, and he does good things, and he's kind of a good guy, and he's like met a few people and done some signings of defense agreements for alliances, and yeah, he's a good guy. Like, no. Or, oh, this is an authoritarian dictator, and everyone fears them, and they're like kind of bad, and like they've done bad stuff, and they've been in these wars, and they've like invaded these little people, and like they're kind of bad, and they're like making bad decisions and all this stuff. Like, just get out of those tropes. Look at real life. Look at nation leaders in real life, right now, modern day, or even in history. You've got people who might be doing good things who are absolutely corrupt as all fuck and get ousted. Or you might have, really fucking awful people that get voted into office because they coup themselves into power because they're super awesome and because, everyone loves them because they're making all of these promises to fix the economy and give people jobs and help people's healthcare or whatever. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know is that they're sending the ethnic minorities into the camps. So, try to go with these different, I guess, tropes and not just be fixed to these cookie cutter, blank facades. Make your nation leader into something good. Your nation leader is the absolute sort of high-end face of your faction. They should not be some blank cookie cutter normie person. They should be interesting, people should want to read about them, and people should want to interact them. So don't do that. Again, don't have your nation leader just be completely stoic and static. Give them character development. Don't just have them completely ignore or wave off, contextual scenarios that happen in roleplay. If your democratic guy gets elected on a podium of anti-war and he gets dragged into a war and then he gets re-elected and everyone still loves him, again, just don't do it. It doesn't make sense. Have your people be consistent and have them develop and change according to what's going on in character. Maybe they have been grappling with a particular thing for a long time, but they finally decide to change and take a different route. That's fine. Just make sure that it's all realistic and all been written out so that it isn't just out of nowhere. Don't have your leader be static and not change to suit the situation. But at the same time, don't have your nation leader just randomly doing things what, where, how, and why for no reason. It just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, just try to avoid these things when doing your nation leader. And at the end of the day, they're a character. Treat them as such. And that goes for all the basic character writing rules. And this sort of leads on to examples of good national leaders in Ancerious. I'm going to start with Krag Solon Reich. Character that sort of started off as this like edgy individual who, is kind of like has this big swagger and like, oh yeah, he's a super general and everything. That kind of got turned into a character flaw, and also became sort of part of a running joke between him and another character who was also a nation leader of mine, where, Solon basically did an action in the First Ancerious War that caused the war to effectively not just go on, but a load of things to go horribly wrong. And my nation didn't forgive him for that, and relations were tarnished between the two factions. Solon was actually removed from office at the time as a military commander of the nation, and was sort of put on the back burner. And it all kind of went a bit eerie, and then finally, he got instated as like a top military commander. And while he's not the faction leader anymore, he still has a really good, I guess, banter with my nation leader, who has a good rapport with him now, and the two of them are good friends, and they still joke about it. And he's still got all of this stuff under his belt, but again, he's an ex-nation leader, but he's still an excellent character who showed that you can fuck up and you can sort of take the hit for that. I've already mentioned Empress Anara. She was built from the ground up. For character-wise, she started as literally a throwaway character, developed into probably the most prominent nation leader and character in the entire group, changed galactic history, changed how a lot of people wrote their characters with nation leaders. properly fleshed her out, how she fought against not only the Ancerious Galactic Alliance in the Second War, but how she had to fight her own nation and her own people, not just to gain control from her father, who was a megalomaniac, but also to try and steer society away from certain stigmas about the fact that, she was gay. She believed in more progressive policies, although progressive is a bit of a stretch, but, it's the fact that she had to do all of these things, and every step of the way she was having to fight all of the generals and everything else just to try and gain any sort of advantages. And in the end, she fucked up. She lost the war, and she was, essentially sold out by her own people, and they turned on her and they tried to kill her, and she got captured and imprisoned and tried and then executed eventually. That was proper rise and fall to the end. But what other good nation leaders have we had? Mose Tetlisum for the ASN that Blue Snail runs. He pretty much came to power in a coup, orchestrated, I guess, ironically, by my nation, the Union. He came to power promising, all of this economic miracle and welfare and massive economic booms to his nation, and he did it. He fulfilled it, and it all went, incredibly well. But unfortunately, the cracks began to show, and he was a corrupt individual, and he had put people in power who were also ambitious, and they started, I guess, abandoning ship at the first sign of trouble. And he overextended. And, he did all of these things while having all of this character arc behind the scenes where he was sort of cold and calculating, and, he wouldn't try to take things too personally. And in the end, it cost him the election. And he got ousted, and now he's got like a separate character arc going. And it all just sort of is spiraling down, and that was just really, really, really well done. So those are the ones that I can sort of think of off the top of my head. I'll probably write some more down in the notes, but those are my, I guess, helpful tips on how to RP a nation leader. Did you guys have any questions at all? Or is that it? I see. Okay. I think that's it then, judging by the silence. In that case, I thank you all for attending, and I shall catch you soon.